So I'm Sage Ross, and we're going to have a panel today exploring a little bit about the Wiki Education Dashboard. And I have with me three wonderful panelists who I've worked with on the dashboard before. And so let's just kick this off. I'd love it if the panelists could each introduce yourselves. Let's start with Sulagna.
Hi, so I am currently a senior computer science major at Mount Holyoke College. I'm an international student studying here in US from Bangladesh. And I did the outreach internship last summer with Sage. And I would say like that was an amazing experience, but that's my intro for now. And I had some couple other experience working in the software engineering side and other things.
Matt?
Yeah, I'm Matt Fordham. I'm in Seattle, and I'm a software developer and have been making stuff for the web and for other devices for a while. I got started in the late 90s, so I guess it's been like a quarter century at this point. My background and what I do I'm independent and have been for a number of years, and I work mostly for clients. So my thing is mostly not open source, but I have worked with Sage a lot over the years, and I oversaw the initial development of the dashboard, and when we'll get into this more, I'm sure. But when it was initially started, it was it was open source from the get-go, but the people working on it were not coming from an open source point of view, and then it more evolved more into being completely supported in that way. So it'll be interesting to hear about that side of the things. Yeah, anyway, that's me.
Great.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I am Chauhan, and I am pursuing BTech in computer science from Bennett University, and currently in my third year of graduation, and recently had a great opportunity to work under Wikimedia Foundation, which I got through Google Summer of Code. And in that great exposure, I mainly con- focused on working with the functionalities for handling training content, like creating, updating, and deleting those training slides, modules, and libraries, and stuff like that.
And I'll introduce myself a little bit as well. I am Sage, and I came to the world of open source software mainly through Wikipedia. So I have been a Wikipedia editor since about 2005, and I kind of gradually got pulled into the tech side of things, starting with product management, which was my role when the dashboard started out. And from there, I sort of became a little bit more of a coder myself, and have kind of been doing my best to keep the wheels on this software project that is the dashboard, basically for the last 10 years or so. And so over that time period, it's been sort of a wild ride to work with not just these three folks, but a bunch of other contributors, both people that I've reached out to as contractors to work on the dashboard, as well as a whole lot, I think more than 24 at this point, interns that I've worked with over the years from Google Summer of Code and Outreachy and those sorts of things. So my colleague suggested that I kind of start off with sharing a little bit of context about the dashboard, just to kind of like give people a little idea of how it gets used and sort of like what role it plays in the ecosystem. And so I'll just show a couple of quick things in that regard. This is kind of a little hidden page of the dashboard that I mainly made for myself, because I periodically get asked questions like, hey, how many people are using it? How many courses do we have? So this is the usage page for the dashboard, and it shows that the Wiki Education instance of it on dashboard.wikiedu.org has more than 150,000 people who have logged on using their Wikipedia accounts. And we have almost 4,000 different people who have run courses with Wiki Education. Now, the sad little statistics here are that Wiki Education has only worked with 3 different wikis as the sort of the home wiki for a project. We mainly work in English, although we've added in contributions from 50 other wikis. Now the exciting part is that we also have this other server, the Programs and Events Dashboard, which is used by the broader Wikimedia community. And we have some similar stats here, but they're balanced a little differently. So more than 110,000 people have logged in with their Wikipedia accounts, but more than 6,000 different people have set up events on it. And that includes 427 different wikis with 219 home wikis that people have tracked. So a large portion of the languages that Wikipedia is in, folks have used the dashboard to run projects on those wikis. And here's just kind of the contributor statistics to the dashboard to give you an idea of like how the development history has gone. So we have almost now 200 different contributors to the dashboard code base. And so it has about 18,000 commits, I think, which I've done a little over 7,000. So I'm responsible for sort of less than half, and a huge number of other people have come along over the years to make major contributions to this code base. So that's a little bit of kind of background on it. Now I wanted to just give our panelists here a little more chance to kind of share their stories and talk about an example of some of the things that they've done on the dashboard and what it was like, especially sort of the first project that you did, Matt, when we get to you. But Sulagna, why don't you start and tell us about your internship project?
Yes, so my project was mainly about Wiki Data Diff Analyzer. As the name suggests, mainly what I did was about working with Wikidata edits, where whenever there is a revision in a Wikidata item, previously it was being handled with like the summary that was added by the user. But for me, what I did is I kind of automate the process using the JSON, like the patterns, and I wrote a separate gem. So mainly my project was not at first directly coding into the Wiki Education Dashboard code base, but kind of separately creating a gem library where I have all the code which kind of detects the patterns and give the accurate stats of what is the difference between two version of Wikidata edits. And then I kind of return with kind of user friendly way from the gem. And finally, kind of I was very excited about integrating that gem in the Wiki Education Dashboard. And the exciting part of my project at the end was it got integrated, and people, whenever they add a new edit, my code was getting run by those edits. So mainly that's the kind of summary of the project that I had done. And I would say that as a person of like what I would say, coming from a background where I didn't know anything about open source, this was like kind of a best way to get used to what open source means. So I am happy to answer about any question in that sense, if anyone is new to open source, like what it feels to be in this space and anything. So yeah, that's kind of a summary.
Awesome. And when was your project?
Oh, sorry, can you repeat the question?
When did your project take place?
It was last summer. So it was from May 2023 to August 2023. And I was an Outreachy intern.
And so your code has been in production for a little more than a year now. And one of the things that I sort of reflect on now is that we've had zero problems with it. We, as you mentioned, we created it as a separate gym because we thought that that functionality kind of made sense on its own. Um, and I haven't had to touch that code at all, which is really the sign that makes me really proud as a mentor of you know, you made a project that like worth its weight in gold if I don't have to keep on editing it and fixing bugs. You want to tell us about your project?
Yeah. Let me begin with the problem statement that we initially had. So previously, the process of creating or handling those training content is quite cumbersome as we require to create those JSON pages and integrate them on backend, and then we could able to see those on front end. So for as a new as a newbie or as a newcomer, it's quite cumbersome to do all those stuff. So I make that flow more user friendly and uh, created a specific approach to create, delete, and edit those whole training content and to make it more manageable through UI.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that was sort of critical about your project is that it's actually a really complex set of functionality that it was bigger than most projects that I would sort of support for an internship. But you'd done such a great job with sort of your initial contributions that I sort of like took a risk and said, all right, well we'll see if we can pull it off. And the it's worth noting that like we haven't actually deployed Ohm's changes yet. There's still a couple of more things that are sort of like I want to make sure are all set in place because it's going to open up basically the training module system for anyone in the community to start writing their own training modules without the way that it has been happening in the past, which was like a complex interaction between on wiki things where you had to like create everything to configure it on MetaWiki and then like have that ported into the dashboard, and not like it was hard to document that in the first place, but also few people were sort of like technically adept enough or just had the patience to like dive through all those steps necessary. And so I'm really excited to see what we end up having once we do get this deployed. But this is sort of like some work that it's going to be really cool once we have that ability to create and edit training modules right from the dashboard. Matt, you want to tell us about some of the ways that you've been involved with the dashboard?
Yeah, for sure. Totally different story from my point of view, and hearing the other stories. It's amazing, and it's so gratifying to hear how what we started so long ago has continued to evolve and grow and become so much more so much deeper and sort of more sophisticated. But I formerly was technical director at a digital agency in Seattle, and I guess this was it 10 years ago, Sage.
Yeah, it
So
was
10 years ago.
like 11 years ago.
Oh goodness.
No,
Okay.
10 years ago.
So
You're right, 10 years ago.
okay. So we were tasked with designing and developing the first version of the dashboard. So what Sage came to us with was a goal, an idea, a goal, and nothing existed yet. So I oversaw the technical process of building that first version, and the group of people that I was working with also kind of established the design system and the visual look and feel of things, and it's certainly grown a lot. But some of the basic visual components and direction of the dashboard. So I've certainly contributed code to the dashboard, but initially I was acting more as a sort of an architect, I suppose, and helping the team along with Sage sort of figure out what the right tools, what the right approach would be. And it was then a unique challenge for me, a new challenge. And in that, when hired to build something for profit, it's usually for the sake of the customers, right, or for the sake of the message that the company is trying to get to their customers. And it's pretty easy in those circumstances to kind of go back to the why are we doing this and what's the point question is often very clear, because the person who's paying you will be able to very likely tell you that clearly. But with open source and with this project, there's a lot of potential. And, earlier on, I think it was easier to come up with a singular, this is the mission. But as time passes, and tools evolve, and Sage has done a really wonderful job of making the dashboard do a few different things for a few different potential target audiences. And Sage, you certainly tell me if I'm mischaracterizing your point of view, but it becomes more challenging, I would imagine, to answer that question very clearly, like what's the point of all this and what are we doing? And the more open source contributors there are, the more opinions you're likely to have around that, because people are contributing for their own personal reasons. And that is not, for the most part, the projects I work on, I am contributing because I'm paid to contribute, not because I have a personal goal or desire or for the greater good. So it's a totally different thing, and in so many ways it's a more gratifying point of view to have, but it is not it doesn't simplify things to have so many more cooks in the kitchen, right? But the reasons they're there are sometimes more heartfelt. Anyway, so as time has passed, I have contributed less code to the Wiki dashboard, but I do help out with things from time to time, and have also continued to work with WikiEdu on other similar kind of newer projects. So I'm certainly still working with Sage closely on a lot of stuff. And same thing, as we're working, I'm always kind of concerned with like, well, what's the goal here? Who are we doing this for? What problems are we trying to solve? And it's so interesting and nourishing for me to have those answers be something other than, well, it's to sell stuff and to sell as much stuff as we can.
So your team created the initial version of the code base, and one of the things that I was sort of like wrestling with, but really didn't have any, experience knowing how to answer as I was kind of shopping around for, well, who am I going to hire to start this project off? At the time, I didn't have any, coding skills to speak of myself. And so one of the things that I would talk to people about would be like, okay, well, what technologies are you going to use to build this? And of course, we can look back now and say, hey, like, what the choices that we made then like have really been determinant in like how the project has gone long term. And in particular, like your team was proposing to, and then did, use Ruby on Rails and JavaScript, in particular the React framework, as sort of the two core technologies that we would build it around. And so like how do you feel about that now, like 10 years later, like as sort of a looking back as a choice for a code base like this?
Yeah, and that's a good question. And despite the fact that the purpose of the majority of the projects that I certainly have worked on at the time, and even still, are not open source, the tools themselves are almost always open source. So what that translates to is mostly I don't work in Microsoft tools that often, and the web is largely based on open source technology, and it was obviously the dashboard had to be built with open source technology because it itself was to be open source, but fortunately that kind of lined up with what the development approach I had at the time and still have now. I use open source tools in all of my work, and The short answer is 10 years later, it's incredible how much has changed. But at the same time, if I were to start this now, I would say let's use Rails and React. And so I certainly have no regrets around that. The React side of things especially has had a lot of changes, and there's certainly specific approaches in that community that have evolved over the last 10 years for sure. But with somebody with some forethought at the helm, like Sage, those changes can be reacted to incrementally. And fortunately, the underlying technologies of Ruby and JavaScript have remained very much embraced in general, but certainly in open source. And the folks that are used to those tools are used to, if not building open source projects themselves, they're certainly used to the open source back and forth around how tools develop, how tools evolve, and how tools, break and get fixed, right? Like I have, prior to the Wiki Dashboard project and since, I am on GitHub every day, not necessarily as an open source contributor, but as a open source consumer. And it's so anyway, so it's part of, it's in the water for sure for me, and was at the time at that agency. So yeah, so I'm rambling now a little bit, but the short answer is those, they were strong open source tools at the time, and they remain so, and they've gotten, I think, a lot stronger as time has passed. And certainly React is undeniably kind of the on the top of the mountain of JavaScript frameworks. Sage, did I answer that question?
Great.
I don't even remember what it was.
I sort of feel the same way. Like, I didn't know anything about it at the time, but especially the choice of sort of using Ruby on Rails as the backend framework. Like, I feel like that was a big part of what ended up giving me the enthusiasm and sort of like momentum to really dive into the coding world myself. And I still like, my heart is still with Ruby in terms of like the way that I like to program. But I think also it's like, it's a language that has not been widely used in the Wikimedia ecosystem in particular. And so I was a little nervous about that, but also like one of the things that it has offered in the meantime is that like, it's for some interns an attractive project because it's kind of the only one in the Wikimedia world that uses the particular set of technologies that we do. And so people who have a little bit of background in those will gravitate to it. And so the project benefits because we often get some wonderful interns that are enthusiastic about those technologies, which is why I want to turn it over to Sulagna and then Om to hear about sort of what your relationship with the technology base of the dashboard is, and sort of like how you feel about Ruby and React and how it fits into sort of your trajectory as a developer.
Initially, as a full stack developer, I started with MERN stack, including those Mongo, React, and JavaScript. Basically, JavaScript and object-based things going all around the whole MERN stack, including Node.js. And but when I saw our project of Wiki Education Dashboard, then I got like, oh, Ruby on Rails is something on the like which has lot of automations and built-in conventions, which is quite overwhelming as a beginner to see. And unlike MERN, where I had more control over the structure, Rails offers a more opinionated framework. Like, it was challenging to adjust at first, but it made development faster once I understood the flow. That's how it is for me.
And have you had a chance to use it any more since then, or is this the only Ruby that you've done?
That's the only I have done till now.
So my experience was kind of a little different. So the way I got into Ruby and Ruby on Rails was by one of my professor here. Like I took a class in Five College. So basically not in my college, another college. And the class was about software development and everything. But she stressed in the final project, we all use Ruby on Rails. And I was like, what is Ruby on Rails? I even didn't know. Like I was using React, and I knew about MongoDB and all those things in hackathon projects, but Ruby on Rails was something very new. But my professor was like so confident that it is going to, like, it's open source and it's going to take the world later, so you have to learn it. And that's how I got into it. And we built a application on that. And when I actually was coding and understanding the structure, I felt like I feel much more comfortable using it in the coding wise. And especially I didn't the main thing is I didn't learn Python before Ruby. Ruby was I learned Java before Ruby, and it makes sense that Ruby was, I was feeling much more comfortable with Ruby. And later I saw Python, I'm like, okay, it doesn't matter actually the programming language, but mainly I got comfortable with it that time. And then when I was applying for Outreachy, I saw this project, and I was actually not, I was so not confident. I'm like, I'm a sophomore, I don't know anything, but I know Ruby, and I know this project requires Ruby. And I applied to it just because I knew what the Ruby language is. And then I got to know Wiki Education Dashboard, which is kind of such a big what I'll say, such a big example that how Ruby on Rails can work so well in a bigger ecosystem, which I didn't know. And I can share a little more about like exactly what it means, what it meant for me to dive into the Wiki Education Dashboard, because when I installed it in my computer, which took like 2 weeks of like work, that okay, now Wiki Education Dashboard is running on my laptop. But when I went to the code base, I can see like how Ruby, it had like different what else, the partitions where like React is one part, like front end base, and then Ruby is kind of one part in the backend part. And I could see that the interactions were like much harder to catch, like how the backend is kind of interacting with front end. But I also got to like introduced to the Ruby and React what else, a combination, which I use later actually. I learned from Wiki Education Dashboard, and then I did some hackathon projects later, which worked very well, like this combo. Yeah, but that is, sorry, I think I'm kind of rambling now, but that was my experience.
Awesome, thank you. One of the things that I'm sort of curious about and always like kind of, wrestling with is that as you kind of alluded to, right? Like the dashboard has grown into a pretty substantial code base. Like it has, more lines of code than most developers can kind of like hold in their heads at once. Certainly me. Like I often get asked questions and I'm like, oh, I don't know the answer to that. And I have to look up the code and see who wrote it. And often it was me. And I'm like, why did I do that? That makes no sense. But like, I have to refer back to the code because there's so much of it and there's a lot going on, which, in many ways is regrettable. But we're keeping it going so far, and it seems to be okay. It's still possible for people to dive into this code base. But I guess that was a long preamble to my question, is like, what did you find really kind of to be the hardest thing about working with the dashboard and its code base? And Sulagna, let's start with you, and I'd like to hear from
At first, I think I would say understanding the folder structure was the most hardest part, and also when the code hits, like one API request hits, exactly where does it hit, and how the flow works, was something like, as a person, like when I didn't know how to code a big system like this, like it definitely requires like so much effort. And I knew that, oh, it's a 10 years old, like more than 10 years old code base. There are so many things like happened step by step, and I am looking right now, sitting all of them together. I definitely don't know what came first, what came second, but I knew that in my head, I had this expectation from myself that I have to understand everything, which was a wrong thing. Like slowly, I think Sage, you helped me to kind of like walk down and understand, okay, now I'm focusing on test cases, let's focus on test cases and see, okay, how each one of the test case in one folder is interacting with the code it is kind of based on. So I think that was the hardest part at first, because I was expecting like I have to get grasp over everything to accomplish something out of it, but that's not the true in any ecosystem. And in our code base, I feel like it's kind of nicely organized from my side. I think we can get better, but I'm just saying it was nicely organized, and slowly that hard part became easier, because I think for the mentorship, and also when you define the problem more, you understand which part to work with, and then you can kind of deep dive. So
Awesome. You're muted. We can't hear you. You're muted.
Oh, sorry for that. Is now I'm audible? Okay. So the hardest part for me was understanding the legacy code base, which was dealing with the whole training content initially, and how it was like bringing up all those content and injecting to both of the different servers, either from the YAML file, taking the code, taking all the data from the YAML file and injecting in those different servers, how the code is working and where the call is going on, how the flow is. So understanding that part was quite a bit difficult. Once I like got how the things are going on, then I keep on like developing things over it and making sure that everything aligned with the project goals.
And Matt, that training system that was alluding to, where we load training content from YAML files for the Wiki Education Dashboard, but also basically load it from MediaWiki for programs and events dashboard. That was code that you had some hand in, if I recall. Does that ring any bells?
Perhaps very faintly.
I remember that we had talked about sort of the central design goal there being that we wanted to make it as sort of straightforward to manage the content of the trainings as possible
Yeah.
initially, and that's why you ended up settling on using YAML to sort of do this. And then I think I was taking on the project of, hey, I want to make this possible for people to do it the wiki way, where you can just edit a wiki and change these things. And so I was very excited about that, and sort of like, understood just enough Ruby to be dangerous. And so I remember you sort of like providing some guidance on, oh, how can we make these patterns sort of parallel to each other and treat the wiki similarly to the way we do the YAML files, so that we could sort of like use the same Ruby infrastructure for handling them both in parallel. And that was something that I think, the complexity there is mostly my fault, because I insisted that, hey, we gotta do this on the wiki way. Whereas if I had done it again today, I might have just gone the route that we had do of providing some interface to edit it like directly from the dashboard. In retrospect, that might have made a lot more sense. But like the sort of like the wiki way always draws me in sometimes. Let's see. The next thing I have on my agenda here is kind of a more perspective thing. What advice would you have for a developer who's interested in the dashboard and just getting started? And I'll open this up to anybody who wants to give it a shot.
Yeah, I just briefly, I think with any sort of larger open source project, probably getting in touch with whoever, one or the team of the maintainers, and sort of getting a sense of like, what are the highest priorities and what would you recommend a newbie sort of tackle first. And I think Sage, even in some of your, I think that you're tagging issues on GitHub accordingly, even like this is a good task for somebody that's just getting started. Is that correct, Sage? Am I remembering that right? Yeah. So communicating probably is the number one thing, just like getting to know the people and looking for some of those issues. And then without a doubt, what the others have said, getting a project like this up and running is one of the biggest challenges. There's no doubt. There's a lot of moving parts. So finding something that is as modular and isolated as possible is probably going to be easier than working on a component that, you know, whose branches or roots sort of are spread everywhere, right? And you mentioned before, Sage, with the YAML versus the wiki data thing, the idea of interfaces between different components. And it's certainly as wise to have the components of a system have sort of neutral and predictable interfaces between each other. So anything that you can find that can be its own separate isolated module that can have a predictable interface with other things will probably be easier than working on something that's kind of touches everything. So yeah, I would say getting to know the people and looking for items on GitHub, for example, that are marked as this is good for somebody that just wants to dip their toes in the water.
I can go next. I think I agree with everything that Matty mentioned. I just want to say one thing. I think I heard this analogy from somewhere, but open source is kind of like you entering a room where it feels like everyone knows everything. You are the person who doesn't know anything, because it's like it's a collaborative like world. And first of all, when I was first into open source, I didn't know what does that mean. I didn't have any idea what does open source mean. I know that, okay, everyone can use it, but getting into something from a background, I feel like from the way I have grown up, it was very competitive mindset all the time, even in coding, like everything. But how you can use each other's effort together, it's open source is kind of like a very good example. And in that sense, I feel like I would say anyone who is signing up for open source to understand, especially like from the perspective, if anyone is applying for Outreachy or Google Summer of Code, is that it's not a short-term thing. It's kind of you are being a part of a long-term process. So everyone is kind of actively working. There is no that whatever contribution you can make is a part of a big longer process, and it will kind of help in the process. And also this is like because it is collaborative, it's the best space to feel safe and to ask anything, like any error or anything. And that's how we can also learn without any big stake, because like everyone is making mistakes and other people are there kind of having seen it, like seeing it, and kind of helping there. If someone is not available, another person will be available. So in that sense, kind of even though the first activation energy is hard, that you are entering somewhere like where it feels like I at least when I entered, it felt like I didn't know a lot of things. But when you will be kind of giving that commitment, at least I feel like this is a very nice thing that in Outreach and Google Summer of Code, you have a contribution period, which is so different than if you are giving a software engineering interview, or if you are signing up into another position where you are like doing internship. You just give one interview and then people judge you on based on that. But here in open source, actually people don't judge like on just a simple your contribution, but in your long-term performance. And I think that's a big thing I have learned from open source, and I would always appreciate like this culture.
Is there anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah. I would like to keep it more generic, like if anyone wants to set up, especially what I did with Wiki Education, and would advise any newbie to go with the flow. Like first one, I have few points in mind. Like the very first one, the exploring the documentation, because that's kind of act like a Bible when you enter in a new code base or any new project. So exploring the documentation is a very good part of a process. And then setting up the environment is the second step that you should focus on, which I remember that first when I set up the project, what I did was, I feel wrong is like setting up each service locally on my machine and then fixing those configurations and dependency issues. Then I like understand Docker, and with the help of that, it's like a one click to start the whole project and integrate all those services, and which I will advise a newbie to go with that flow. So it gonna be more fluent, and the setting up is like quite easier as compared to the formal one. Secondly, looking at the existing contributions, how people are contributing, and starting with the small steps is, and then growing up gradually with your contributions is the second thing that I would advise for someone who is new to the project. Be patient and iterate gradually, and lastly, engage with the community, so that as open source is all about community driven, so as much we talk and explore our ideas with the someone who is like handling the project or our co-member. So that's it from my side.
Wonderful. So the last question that I wanted to put out to people before we move on to the Q&A section, which if anyone has questions, please post them in the Q&A thing shortly, and we can try to get to them. But my question is sort of, what recent or emerging technologies do you think like will be or sort of might be relevant to the dashboard in the future? I mean, we've sort of built so far around some pretty well established technologies of React and Ruby on Rails, and there's various other smatterings of things that are tossed in the mix, and of course we interact heavily with a lot of other tools in the Wikimedia ecosystem specifically. But I'm wondering if there are any things that you're sort of like really excited about for sort of a next generation of tools to build open source projects on, and especially if you see any that sort of like you could imagine would be really cool to apply to the dashboard.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. So for me, the as I've alluded to already, like the first question is like, what are we trying to solve here? What's the goal? What's the idea? And then the tools follow that. And for that reason, I tend to not be much of a zealot with tools, because I'm more concerned about just fixing the problem or accomplishing the goal. And it seems to me as though that one of the greatest strengths here is the community and having people be involved and be engaged. And to that point, I think something like it's not a particularly new technology, but something like Docker, which allows for virtual environments to be set up very quickly and in a very automated way, could go a long way to help some of the onboarding challenges that we've been discussing. And having people in the code base relatively quickly, and contributing seems like a great benefit to a project like this. So I would put out tools. I would throw out tools that can aid with getting collaborators collaborating as quickly as possible.
You looked like you were ready to jump in there.
Yeah. As we are seeing that emerging technologies like AI or machine learning, we can implement those in our project in many ways, like introducing a personal chat bot, or like a simple machine learning algorithm to recommend courses based on the user's history or interest in the past, like the topics in which is interested in the past. We can recommend new courses or events from the program and events dashboard. uh, and there's also a point we can also improve our searching functionality using NLP. So that's also a great point to consider on. And that's it from my side.
Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I was also some of the points I wanted to mention. Already touched based on, but I was thinking about asking about search and recommendation side of the side, like how that's being handled right now. I don't know, but new ML technologies, LM, definitely those are everyone is kind of like making the part of the project. So, but I am thinking like exactly based on what the users like, if we can do a survey, like what the users kind of want to see, based on the users of these new technologies, like how helpful it will be for them, the students and the teachers who are using it. I think that including that component will, and then deciding will be nice. But I was in general thinking about a better search and recommendation strategy using the new ML. That's what actually was in my mind.
Very cool. Thank you. Well, there's a neat little question that we have in the question and answer, which I'll try to take a shot at right now. So Calliope asks, well, it says, I love the dashboard. Has anyone tried to adapt the dashboard for use with non-Wikimedia, open source, open data knowledge graphs? And if not, how feasible would it be to do so? So that's a great question, and one that has come up occasionally in the last many years, of could we use this for visualizing some other things that are outside of the Wikimedia ecosystem, especially other wikis, where we can sort of take the same model of tracking the contributions. And I would say that the answer used to be sort of a pretty hard no. We've really built the code base specifically around like some of the quirks of the Wikimedia ecosystem. But I think we've gradually chipped away at some of that in some ways, that the sort of like core data models that we have for it are relatively flexible. There still is a lot that we sort of like have hard coded to specifically look for Wikimedia sort of services, and that there are certainly a number of sort of like monsters hiding in the broader wiki technical ecosystem that we would have to handle if we were, for example, letting you connect to any arbitrary MediaWiki instance to like compile statistics. But it actually, I think, is relatively feasible. It would be a big project, and relative to all of the other things that people are already using this for, the amount of demand has been relatively small for that kind of thing. But it actually is a feasible project to take on at some point. I don't know that we'll ever attempt to do that. And in terms of the broader open data world, now that we have some experience with Wikidata and sort of like using Wikibase and its data structures as sort of the way to analyze that with your work, Sulagna, like that broader open data world of other Wikibase instances is also potentially something that could be done, but it would be a big lift. We have another question from Wiki Education's Leanna Davis. She asks, for any or all panelists, you all have worked on the technical side of a tool that works with Wikipedia. What's something you learned about Wikipedia in the process of developing for the dashboard?
I can say, like, I would say I didn't learn a lot about Wikipedia, but I learned a lot about Wikidata. And when I was working with different structures, I realized that there's so much outdated like kind of categories, and like I had to kind of deal with those because I was trying to make code the most optimized version, and I'm like, well, I have this edge case, I have that edge case. So like the way, what else, the basic structure work where people edit Wikidata and then things get saved. So I was like, okay, so because it built on top one top of another, I kind of learned a lot about that structure. It was kind of fun to explore the algorithm to see, okay, how we can efficiently do it, the count, the differences. But yeah, and also it is kind of amazing that how many people actually contribute to those items, like each items which gets included, and people learn so much from those. So I was really happy exploring all those.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I think the main thing that I've learned is how committed and passionate the maintainers of Wikipedia are, you know. And I was always clear on the fact that it was a community project, but to be literally looking through, you know, API responses with revision data, it's plainly clear how detail oriented and passionate the people involved are. So it's not a technical observation, but it certainly an inspiring. I have a much greater appreciation for the resource that is Wikipedia at this point.
Anything you wanted to toss in there?
Yeah. Is I'm audible?
Yes.
Okay. While developing the dashboard, I learned Wikimedia's model is heavily rely on community collaboration, emphasizing the importance of collective information, contributing and creating the whole content. That's what the Wikimedia brings up to the table, the transparency that it provides to the users, and sharing information freely, which greatly enhances accessibility for new users or the existing ones. Understanding these expressed deeply,
Thank
that's
you.
what I uh, feel Wikimedia is all about.
Cool. Well, I think we're nearing the end of the panel, but if anyone had any final thoughts that they wanted to share, now would be a great time. Is there anything that you were really just sort of like itching to get in there? Let us know now. And meanwhile, I will say that you know, I really appreciate each of the three of you, but also everyone else that I've worked with, like sort of over the years on the dashboard project. And I guess one of the things that I really appreciate now that I think I've learned about Wikipedia as I've developed the dashboard is sort of like the overlap in spirit between kind of the developer community and the Wikipedia community, which is sort of like you know, the desire to like take knowledge and information and like make that into something like that's useful and practical for people, and sort of like that just dedication to like doing the hard work of dealing with all that complexity so that other people don't have to is what I think of as sort of the shared spirit between like software development and Wikipedians. And so like, I guess, at least for me, that's like, I get to feel at home in both worlds, and that's wonderful. Now, I will exhort anyone who's watching who is interested in open source software development to check out our code base, and if you're interested in diving in, just get in touch with me, and I can help you find your way into the project. I'm also looking forward to another round of internships coming up here. We're going to be kind of doing some work focused on the developer experience and the test environment, and making sure that we have better ways of keeping track of what our servers are doing in production, as opposed to what most of my internship projects have been in the past, which is kind of focused on adding new features. I ought to spend more time and have other people spend more time on you know, reworking the things that we have and cleaning those up. And so I'm excited to dive into some of those projects soon. Final thoughts, anyone? And with that, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
This has been a Wiki Education Speaker Series event, and you can check out our website, wikiedu.org, and find the Speaker Series page if you want to learn about future events. We have them most months. Our next one will be in December, and then you can look forward to more in the coming year. Thanks, everyone.